Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Rono. Now via WebEx, Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Dr. Hicks, thank you for being there. I want to also thank you for being so generous with your time on the phone call last week. We covered a number of different topics. I did want to get back to some of the discussion we had last week, particularly around the, on the one hand, I like all the responses you've given to my colleagues on commitment to modernization and our defense strategy. On the other hand, I think we're going to come up with funding issues and challenges to keep those programs on track. So how do we, when you go into this role, and I intend to support your confirmation, how do you look at getting more productivity out of the dollars we already have in the face of the economic challenges that we have, and maybe an administration that wouldn't place the same priority on funding that you've seen over the last 4 years? How do you get more productivity? What kind of department-wide programs do you think are appropriate to drive more productivity for the dollars being spent?
First, Senator, thank you so much for your statement of support, and I enjoyed our conversation as well. Let me tackle a few aspects of that because it's not an easy answer. I think some of the elements are about tying the capabilities, the programs to capabilities to concepts to what we're trying to achieve, and that concept to capability link has been weak in the department for some time. Again, the department has some work underway. If confirmed, I'd want to get in particular, talk to the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff about the status of that effort and try to understand where the concepts are driving us to ideas about how we perform in the field against challengers. That helps us really focus the mind on the priorities we need to have in terms of what deters effectively, what creates credible capability, and also, where are there areas that are lower risk? There's never a lack of risk. The question is how to prioritize effectively and be transparent about where we have decided to take risk so that Congress, among others, can make its own determinations about those judgments. I think the other thing I would just point to is the business operations side of DOD. I mentioned in my opening statement that that's an area the Deputy Secretary, of course, needs to be involved directly in. And it's in large part for the reason you point out, which is we have to make every dollar that the taxpayer puts in have a return. And that return should be measured in terms of joint capability. So that means we need to squeeze out obviously abuse, but much more frequently we see waste. And that will be a priority for me.
Thank you, Dr. Hicks. I think I mentioned to you on the call that we had that if I were there in person, I'd be bringing my 600-page plus RFP for the next generation handgun. I think that that's a case study in an acquisition process gone wrong. So I have the bias that what we have to do is go in and stratify some of these acquisition processes that are literally preventing some viable suppliers from even participating because they're so costly and so time consuming that we could get a richer supply base. I think if we get smarter on certain systems, clearly on more complex leading edge technologies, it may take time, but I think all of them have to have an up and down review. Dr. Hicks, I also just want to go back and associate myself with some of the comments made by Senator Blumenthal and Senator Gillibrand on military sexual assault. I suspect that that's going to be a priority in her position as chair of the personnel subcommittee. And I'm very frustrated with some of the confidence that I've placed in the department to make progress and not seeing the kind of progress. And I think the Fort Hood review says a lot, needs to be acted on. The final question I have for you is just your assessment of our NATO relationship and our partners. What challenges or what can we build on based on the prior administration?
Senator, I think the U.S. transatlantic relationship manifested most fully in NATO in the military sphere is is absolutely vital to any of the challenges we think of in the future. Even when we think about China as the pacing challenge, our relations with our European allies is critical to our effectiveness, our ability to build out a community of democracies that can counter authoritarian approaches. So I see NATO as a centerpiece of our alliance networks throughout the world. I have been concerned, I have written on my concern that the focus on burden sharing, and we should always be focused on burden sharing, ensuring that allies fulfill their commitments, but that when it becomes that tactical issue, it overrides the strategic value of the alliances that the Chinese and Russians could only hope to match. We have if we get to that point, we have become astrategic, and I'm very hopeful that President Biden, who has spoken eloquently on this issue, will make good progress in returning strategy to the center of our alliance relations.
Thank you. I look forward to working with you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Dr. Hicks, congratulations on your nomination. A couple of topics. First on sexual assault in the military. When we grappled with this issue in a major way in 2013, and we've sort of been building upon that since, there were basically three categories of SASC members. There were those who felt this problem was so serious that the only solution to it was to remove it from the chain of command. There were those who felt that the problem was deeply serious and we needed to make the chain of command work to solve it. And then there was a third group into which I, Senator King, some others around the table were in this group. We knew it was serious. We wanted to give the chain of command an opportunity to solve it. But if we were unhappy with results, we were very willing to go the path of taking out of the chain of command. I just sort of want to put on the record that that third group of members of this committee, virtually all of us are really unhappy with the progress since 2013. We're now getting to 8 years from then. And we were willing to give the chain of command new tools, new resources, new accountability mechanisms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we're not happy with the outcome. And so I think it's just important for the Pentagon community to know that that was sort of a swing block in 2013 that led us to go down a particular path. But many of us who were supporting those within the chain of command improvements have been very dissatisfied with the results. And we're now very open to pursuing a different path, as we said we would at the time. That's number one. Number two, here's an accomplishment that is an Obama and Trump era accomplishment that's also an accomplishment of this committee and the Pentagon. Pressure for the Pentagon finally to do an audit, like every other federal agency, and to have every function of the Pentagon and every part of the Pentagon audited. We did that because an audit is a good oversight tool for this committee. An audit is a good accounting tool for the numbers folks at the Pentagon, but we also did it because an audit should be a good management tool for folks like you. Tell this committee how you will use the audit in your role should you be confirmed.
Well, thank you, Senator. My understanding from the team that's in the Defense Department, based on my work on transition, is that the audit, in fact, has been useful as a tool of transparency, getting the data up and shared and known. First of all, points directions to some of these business process improvements that we can have. But then even operationally, it's had the effect of revealing inventory, excess inventory, things of that sort, that not only, again, is efficient, but gets real capability out to the field, spare parts that exist in inventory that are needed in the field, but we didn't know we had them. So the audit has revealed some of those very basic approaches, as you say, that every business has to abide by and is advantaged by. I think it has also pointed more generally to the value of data. And as we move into an era of data, the department needs to move there too. And the audit is showing the way to how data can be leveraged to make more sound analytic decisions.
I hope you'll continue that focus. Any dollar or energy we spend on something unnecessary or ineffective is a dollar that we're not spending on these real challenges we have before us. Last question is this. There are positions still to be named in the Biden administration, undersecretaries of defense for acquisition and sustainment and research and engineering. Many of the nominees and appointments for DoD spots thus far are veterans of the Obama administration, local think tanks, advocacy groups, all of which is important, but none thus far have extensive acquisition or industry experience. The department was well served, in my opinion, by some previous officials like Secretaries Lord, Gertz, McCarthy, who had sizable acquisition experience before their appointments. If confirmed, do you have any sense of where the department will look to fill up the ranks of the A&S and R&E portfolios so that we'll have acquisition and research expertise in a Biden Pentagon?
Senator, Secretary Austin, when he was nominee, Austin and I spoke quite a bit about those particular positions. And then, of course, you have the service acquisition executives who have increased responsibilities in these areas. And I know from Secretary Austin, this is among his highest priorities in terms of positions to fill in the near term. I can't speak on his behalf about the particulars of individuals, but I can tell you that the attributes I know that the department needs is that acquisition expertise, is a familiarity with the hardware and software ends of where the department's capabilities are coming from, and a really fine-tuned sense of how to work in new ways with industry to some of the issues that have already been raised. There are significant challenges to non-traditional defense players getting into the marketplace. We need to lower those if we're going to compete successfully.
Thank you, Dr. Hicks. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kane. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Dr. Hicks, congratulations on your nomination, and appreciated the opportunity to chat the other day, and really, sorry, I'm looking at my time here. Appreciate your background and our discussion. I'm going to follow up on that on a number of the topics. Of course, I raised the issue of the Arctic and Alaska's place as we're an Arctic nation because of my great state. Can I get your commitment, if confirmed, that you'll get up to Alaska and see the importance of the Arctic and our strategic location there?
Senator, I would welcome coming to Alaska.
Good. Well, you know, Billy Mitchell, the father of the U.S. Air Force, called Alaska the most strategic place in the world. But I have a new quote that I'm going to start using. The now Secretary of Defense, in his confirmation hearing, Secretary Austin said, "I absolutely agree that Alaska is a national treasure, and it holds some of the most important military assets and resources." Would you agree with your future boss?
I do.
On that? Okay, good. One of the things that he did say, as we have been pressing the Pentagon, which, as I've told you and firmly believe, the Pentagon's been asleep at the switch on the strategic nature of the Arctic, the national defense strategy. The great power competition is literally taking place there as we speak, Russia, China, others. Because of this committee's leadership, no offense, not really the Pentagon's, the services have now gotten serious about service strategies. Secretary Austin committed to fully resourcing these service strategies as it relates to the Arctic. Can I get your commitment on that as well?
Senator, I'm certainly committed to making sure we have the capabilities we need in the Arctic.
Great, thank you. Let me turn to what I think is a real simple question, but to be honest, I'm having a hard time with some of the incoming Biden cabinet officials to commit to this. In your personal opinion, the United States, I want your personal opinion on this. From a national security and foreign policy perspective, we have once again become the world's energy superpower because of states like New Mexico and North Dakota and Alaska. We're the largest producer prior to the pandemic, largest producer of oil, natural gas, and renewables in the world. Is that good for our national security and foreign policy?
It is, Senator.
And on the other hand, becoming more reliant on countries like Russia or Venezuela for our oil and gas needs, is that good for our national security or is that bad?
Generally speaking, it's bad.
So here's what I would ask as a commitment. I can't seem to get a commitment from any cabinet official in the Biden administration to be a strong proponent of all of the above strategy. To the contrary, some of the executive orders that came out of the administration last week are focused on curtailing the production of American energy. Do you think that's in the national security interest of our nation?
Senator, I have to say, I think what's in the interest of the United States is to ensure it is not dependent on outside capabilities. But I also believe that growing out alternative uses for alternative energy sources is vital if we're going to manage the challenges of the future.
Oh, I agree that, fully focused on renewables and building that out is critical. I couldn't agree with you more. But we need to do that as we're also producing, say, natural gas, where we can be the leader for the next 50 to 100 years. Low emitting, clean burning Alaska natural gas or others. So I appreciate your focus on that. I appreciate your honesty on that. And I appreciate you being a voice about the importance of this issue, energy security, energy independence, when you're discussing these topics, which in my view are clearly within the realm of the Pentagon's responsibilities, as well as other agencies. Let me turn to China. I was on the Senate floor kind of saying, look, we're given advice and consent. That's what we're doing right now. The consent, of course, is confirmation. The advice is just advice. I saw the White House press secretary last week talk about China and our strategy. She used the phrase that kind of sent a shiver down my back, strategic patience. That was the failed strategy approach under the Obama administration involving North Korea. Do you think that's a good term that we should be using when the challenge and threat from China is immediate?
Senator, I think our approach toward China is first to recognize that they are the pacing challenge for the defense community and that they present a serious alternative model to be rejected with regard to how they govern their society, their authoritarian approaches, and their statist economic approaches. That's where I would center my view. I do think there are opportunities for the United States and China to work together. Those, generally speaking, are not in the defense realm, but even in the defense realm, there are confidence-building measures we should be pursuing so that we can prevent, as I said, so that we can prevent conflict between the two nations.
Thank you, Dr. Hicks. I'll have more questions for the record, but I appreciate your service, and I think I'm certainly going to support your nomination.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Now via WebEx, Senator King.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to correct the record geographically. My dear friend and colleague, Senator Shaheen, I think slipped, and I didn't want to leave any confusion. She characterized the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard as being between Maine and New Hampshire. If you do come to see us, Dr. Hicks, it's in Maine. I just want to clarify that, not between Maine and New Hampshire. More seriously, I want to associate myself with Senator Kane's comments on the issue of sexual harassment. I was one of those that opposed taking this out of the chain of command, have supported multiple reforms starting in 2013 that don't seem to have borne results. So I'm also in the camp of being receptive to more significant change. We simply have to confront this problem in a structural way. I think that has some hope of some solution. I also should mention that one of the changes we made was to criminalize retaliation that does not seem to have been used, at least not very effectively, in the military justice system, and I think that's one of the more serious problems. To move on to just 2 or 3 questions. One is the National Defense Act last year essentially abolished the role of the Chief Management Officer. How do you see replacing that function, if not replacing the individual? We have to be sure that this enormous entity of the Defense Department is effectively managed. Give me some thoughts on replacing the function of the Chief Management Officer.
Well, Senator, first of all, I have been to Kittery, Maine, so I look forward to engaging in the New Hampshire, Maine debate over the shipyard. The Deputy Secretary of Defense is often thought of as the chief operating officer of the Pentagon. My view is that that is an appropriate way to, generally speaking, think of the role. In order to bring business process efficiency and business transformation to the department, you need components and leaders at every level dedicated to making sure the return to taxpayer is appropriate, and again, that the focus is on the joint warfighter and providing what that warfighter needs today and in the future. So I think there are some shared responsibilities, but to the extent that the deputy is the chief operating officer, that position bears the brunt of the responsibility and focus. The current Deputy Secretary of Defense has put forward a memo with the abolishment of the CMO position that lays out the disposition of the responsibilities formally assigned to the CMO. If confirmed, I would want to look at the decision-making behind that memo, understand why he made those decisions, and make my own assessment about whether those are the right places to put those responsibilities. And I would look forward to an opportunity to coming back and speaking with you, Senator King, and others who are interested in this space to make sure that we're set up for success on the functions, as you point out, that need to carry forward.
My concern is that if you have many people responsible, no one's responsible. And one of my philosophies of management is I like to have one throat to choke. That is someone who is accountable. I hope you will consider having in your office a person who's specially assigned to this function. Moving on to the question of cyber, Senator Rounds addressed it very effectively. You talked about we spend billions, and most of this hearing is about all the money we're spending to defend ourselves against potential attacks. I don't believe we're adequately defending ourselves against actual attacks that are taking place at this very moment. And so I hope that the issue of cyber, and you use the term deter our adversaries, the problem of cyber and deterrence is something that we really haven't wrestled with very well. So I hope that's an area that you will pay some special attention to, because as I say, we're spending billions to deter potential attacks, and I don't think enough attention is being paid to deterring and managing actual attacks that are underway at this very moment.
Senator, I will commit to looking into that space, and I want to thank you for the work you've done as a leader on the Cyber Solarium Commission. I know the department already has been directed to adopt many of those recommendations.
One specific I would recommend would be to facilitate threat hunting on the defense industrial base. SolarWinds tells us that sometimes the easiest path into secure systems is through subs and supply chain, and I think that's an area where would be very fruitful in terms of defense. Also, the policy of deterrence, which we can talk about at greater length. Finally, Senator Tillis talked about procurement. We've had testimony before this committee that many smaller companies, particularly in Silicon Valley and in the technology field generally, have given up on the Pentagon. It's too complicated, it's too lengthy, it's too expensive even to fill out the forms. I commend procurement reform to you in that regard, because if we're not taking advantage of the newest ideas, the newest technologies, we're going to lose our qualitative edge, which you have defined as important. So I hope you will consider the the procurement program from the point of view of a 12-person IT firm in Seattle or Portland, Maine, or Austin, Texas, and how we can make the procurement system manageable for that kind of operation.
Senator, I completely agree with you, and this ties into several elements of conversation that have come up this morning. The department has begun to pursue an adaptive acquisition pathways approach. I think that's generally moving in the right direction. If confirmed, I would want to get in and understand, to your point, how well that's serving the full range of particularly non-traditional, those alternative pathways can serve the non-traditional suppliers. The data that I've seen from the outside is that the pickup on non-traditionals is very low. We are not attracting development expertise into the supply chain for DoD from outside the normal traditional base. And that's a real concern. I think greater use of other transactional authority and other pathways has helped at least on pieces of this, but jumping over the valley of death and getting those efforts into procurement, that's the lifeblood for these small companies that cannot survive just on R&D dollars.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. I look forward to working with you on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Senator King. Senator Kramer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Hicks, for running the gauntlet. You're almost through it, really. It's not that much more. You've been very generous with your time, and obviously you've talked to a lot of us on the phone. I appreciated our conversation last week. Appreciated drilling down on some of these issues. And I've also appreciated, frankly, listening to your answers today, as Senator Inhofe, Senator Fisher, Senator Cotton, all have said as a high priority the same thing that you and I talked about last week. That is the modernization of the triad, and not just modernization, or not just extension, but the replacement of key components of it, particularly the airborne and the land-based piece. And so I'm going to skip some of the questions I was going to ask you, and maybe focus on a couple things I didn't hear a lot about. One of the areas that Senator Cotton asked you about, I think he even sort of bifurcated the issue of policy and the product over here from the cost piece over there. I want to ask you about the cost piece, particularly as it relates to the ground-based strategic deterrent. We've talked a lot about it. You've talked a lot about it today. Any delay in that would have it seems, a time value of money part of it that would be detrimental. Could you speak a little bit to the economics of a delay?
Senator, first of all, I also enjoyed our conversation, so thank you very much for your time with me. The challenge I face not being in the administration and not being in the department is I don't know the answer to that question. What I can assure you is that if I'm confirmed, the way you phrase that question is, does the time value of money matter? I can answer that, which is yes. We have, at various points, of course, we have had this in my experience, and we certainly seem to have today, a challenge with regard to making some investment decisions that have been delayed and delayed and delayed. And I understand that there comes a point at which one needs to make the decision. And I am not daunted by that reality. But I don't today, until I can get in, if confirmed, and get a team in place and start to really look at the analysis that's there, I don't have a firm understanding today of what the consequences are going one way or another.
Well, I would look forward to hosting you in Minot on your way to Alaska.
Thank you.
So you can take a good look at the cost of delay. But the other issue that I haven't heard a lot about yet, but you've written about, which I've appreciated, and that is the impact on non-proliferation, the impact of delay and maybe uncertainty from our allies, whether it's Japan, South Korea, others, that rely on our triad umbrella. Maybe you could expand a little bit on that, because I have appreciated some of your writings on that topic.
Well, thank you, Senator. As you may be able to tell from some of my answers, I believe that the alliance network that the United States maintains is a significant comparative advantage over competitors. And I think we should be pretty strategic about how we consider the allied perspective so that we advance that advantage. And one of the areas where the U.S. has built up credibility with allies is through its extended deterrent. That extended deterrent has a nuclear component. There are allies who very much rely on the United States' nuclear assurances, and that helps dissuade their own internal dynamics that might look to develop nuclear weapons themselves. It helps dissuade that viewpoint. So I think it has a significant non-proliferation benefit to the United States by keeping countries that might otherwise pursue nuclear weapons from doing so.
Thank you for that. There are a whole host of other issues, but maybe I'll try to lump them all into one and you can just respond to all of them. We've talked a lot about transparency today. You and I talked about budget transparency. I raised a concern about how some entities have had their budgets hidden from the American people for quite a while, and I worry that some of the secrecy might be more to avoid scrutiny, frankly, than to protect capability. I'm going to avoid some of the specific stuff in this setting, but can you promise to look at some of the organizations and programs within the Department of Defense to make sure the public knows, or even frankly the Congress knows to the maximum extent possible, where the money is going? I'm talking about pass-through budgets that give a false sense of that budget level. The other thing is, again, on your way to Minot, on your way to Alaska, I'd love to have you come to Grand Forks as well. And, there are only 2 bases left between Michigan and Montana along the northern tier. That Arctic mission is very important. Obviously, Minot plays an important role in that. The other one being Grand Forks with its ISR missions. And I'll just throw ISR out there as well. You and I talked about the importance of ISR, particularly in the Middle East, Africa, other places. And some of the cannibalization, as I see it, taking place to make room for these more modern systems. Just a sense of as the COO, I appreciate that illustration. What your thoughts might be on how we balance some of those budget stresses and strategic needs.
Sure, Senator. Let me first comment on the transparency point. I will commit to looking into the questions around, in particular, the pass-through budget with the Air Force, but also more generally looking at the transparency questions to ensure we're telling taxpayers and, of course, members of Congress the maximum that we can do that is operationally safe and wise. The challenge of balancing ready today and ready tomorrow is sort of at the heart of how the Department of Defense is constantly working through its budget and program alignment. I think that tension will exist at any resource level, and I would anticipate that being a major issue that I would face if I were confirmed. I do think that the imperative to be ready tomorrow is very significant right now. I think the resources will always, as I said, be tight and can be especially tight right now. So we're going to probably have to think about doing things differently. And that's where concepts become so important, to figure out how we connect the resources it's really the aims we have to the capabilities we want in a fiscally responsible way.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all of that, and I look forward to supporting your.
Thank you, Senator Kramer. Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman. Dr. Hicks, welcome. I was actually quite encouraged by the previous administration's efforts to increase DoD investments in critical R&D priorities like directed energy, hypersonics, I believe you mentioned, artificial intelligence. I'd note, however, that these technologies are really of little use unless they're transitioned out of our labs and into the hands of actual service members around the world. If confirmed, how would you use your role overseeing the department's internal management processes to speed and improve that tech transition process?
Thank you, Senator. First, I agree with you that there has been some positive momentum in key areas of R&D, and I do think a sustained level of R&D investment is vital. But also, to your point, we actually have to field capabilities, and that's a place where DoD has really struggled. Some of the tools that the deputy could have, working especially with the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is to develop some incentive approaches to get field experiments underway, even beyond experiments up to major exercise level use of capabilities and prototypes that can start to demonstrate the value of some of these new approaches. And when we can demonstrate value, then we're in a much better position to have a dialogue with Congress and with industry about where those capabilities can take us, and that can help us overcome that valley of death. I also think, frankly, we should be looking at how we think about new starts so that we can manage the appropriation cycle more effectively. If I were confirmed, I'd want to get in and understand what makes sense both from a congressional oversight perspective and from the department's perspective, especially in areas like software where the cycle time is so much faster than the typical appropriation cycle.
Thank you. I would really encourage your focus on this issue, and in particular with directed energy. I've watched as the experiments have been proving themselves over and over again, but the desire within the Pentagon to sort of chase the perfect application when there are so many applications where it can provide real value to a warfighter now is a real tension, and I think is in many cases doing us a disservice. You helped lead the Biden team's transition at the Department of Defense over the last several months. I've read with great concern a number of public reports that the previous administration worked to block key transition officials from accessing critical information related to worldwide operations. What's your assessment of how those obstructions impacted important DoD programs and operations, and what can we do on this committee to give you and Secretary Austin the resources you need as you stand up this new team?
Senator, I did have the privilege of leading the Defense Agency Review Team, and let me first say that the vast majority of folks that we worked with in the Pentagon were incredibly helpful, knowledgeable, forthcoming, and it's impressive every day, frankly, to have gone in and seen those military and civilian professionals doing their job. So the challenges we faced were really around a handful of folks that made things difficult. I think the biggest challenge that I will face if confirmed because of this is around budget transparency. The Trump administration worked on an FY22 budget. That's not unusual, but typically that information is shared with the transition team because the administration will owe to Congress a president's budget submission in the spring. So the inability to look at that information, the team, I think, after I was confirmed, so I was not a part of it, did have some ability to look at the information late in January. But I think it will cause some delay in the timeline by which we can give budget quality information back to Congress. So that would be the area I would ask for a little relief on understanding.
Dr. Hicks, 2 weeks ago, I asked Secretary Austin during his confirmation hearing about his plan to prioritize PFAS cleanup and remediation. And I have to be honest, I was discouraged when Secretary Austin sort of deflected DOD's responsibility for PFAS contamination in communities around the country, including one of the hardest hit communities around Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico, despite overwhelming evidence that DoD activities there were the sole source of the contamination. And that is the case in many of these instances. If confirmed, how will you work to prioritize DoD's efforts to stand up and address PFAS cleanup and work with these communities?
Well, Senator, first, I think it's important that senior leadership in the Pentagon meet with the families themselves and the community members and understand what exactly has occurred and what the consequences have been. I also think it's imperative, as Secretary Austin has done, to make it clear that it's a priority for the department, both to ensure it's not putting contaminants out into its military families, military service members, and of course the communities that surround them. And that when we see instances we're working with EPA, I know there's now CERCLA authority that we can access with regard to PFAS, that we are working on solutions to do cleanup and frankly, to meet the timeline. Congress has given us a clear timeline for removing PFAS out of our firefighting approaches. And if confirmed, I'm committed to meeting that timeline.
Thank you, Senator Heinrich. Now via WebEx, Senator Warren.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on your nomination, Dr. Hicks. I appreciated the opportunity to speak with you last week and enjoyed hearing your views on a range of topics. You know, I have been very critical about the size of the defense budget. It's long been a concern of mine, but after the past year, watching more than 400,000 fellow Americans die, tens of millions unemployed due to COVID-19, millions more who are lined up at food banks, and even millions more who are on the threshold of losing their homes and being put out on the street. Spending $740 billion a year on this one piece of the federal budget is unconscionable. A budget is about priorities, and we continue to overinvest in defense while underinvesting in public health and so much more that would keep us safe and that would save lives. So let me ask the question this way. Dr. Hicks, do you believe that we can find ways to lower the top line budget number and then spend that money more effectively without sacrificing our security?
Senator, first let me say I agree with you that the nation has seen in this past year a crisis that is generational in its magnitude, and I certainly understand how it calls into question what the priorities are across our government. I also, though, believe that we are a nation that can afford the defense that it needs to have, and the focus, sometimes it's about spending more, sometimes about spending less, but the focus on the top line number can really obscure a more important conversation around what is it we want our military, in the case of the Defense Department, to do, and what hard choices are involved in getting it in a place to be capable of doing that, being transparent about the risk. So my view to your direct question is I do think there are ways for the Defense Department to be more efficient, to be more effective. I think some of those tools, as I've suggested, involve things like operational concept advancement, making the right kinds of investments, making sure we have a competitive industrial base. But frankly, some of the things, some of the levers that are available take a lot of partnership between Congress, the executive branch, industry, and others to make some hard choices. It would be hard to significantly squeeze the defense budget in light of the threats that we face without that kind of effort together to get to some hard choices.
Well, I just want to make sure I'm understanding your answer here. Are you saying that, yes, we can reduce the top line number without sacrificing our security so long as we work together on this? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yes, and so long as we're willing to make some decisions that may incur risk themselves. Yeah.
Fair enough. So one of your key tasks is going to be linking the military budget to our strategy and to the President's and Secretary Austin's priorities. So if President Biden directs Secretary Austin to lower the top line, and I hope he does, what will be the biggest challenges that you will have to overcome?
I think the biggest challenge is the balancing of the readiness for challenges of today, threats of today, and preparing for the future. That's sort of the overarching piece. But I think more to the mechanics of how we do that will be getting buy-in and a constructive approach with, again, Congress working together with the administration and vice versa in a dialogue, and having industry and other stakeholders willing to come to the table for the greater good to get that done.
Okay, you know, if confirmed, one of the first things you're going to need to do is review our nuclear weapons program. And I know that you believe in a safe and secure and reliable nuclear deterrent. but we're going to spend $44.5 billion on nuclear weapons this year, which is more than the entire budget for the State Department and foreign operations accounts. Will you commit that your review will not simply be a rubber stamp of our current nuclear strategy, but that you really will examine and re-question the core assumptions that underpin it?
Absolutely, Senator.
Good. I really appreciate that. I want a strong defense, but I want one that is tailored to meet the real threats that we face. And more importantly, I want that defense to be built on a strong economic foundation here at home. But that's not what we have today. We face staggering economic inequality that's only getting worse as a consequence of this crisis. And yet the military continues to chug along, disconnected from this reality, plowing billions of dollars into the same big, expensive weapons systems that we've been buying for more than 20 years. We've got to fix this by fundamentally rethinking how we spend our money to protect our nation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Dr. Hicks. Good to see you, and thank you for your willingness to take on this responsibility. It is a large one. Dr. Hicks, listening to Secretary Gates' introduction, I was reminded of a recent book that he wrote, cautioning us to be wary of over-militarizing foreign policy in favor of non-military instruments of power, particularly as we enter into a number of gray zone conflicts, something that you and I were able to speak about at great length earlier, which I appreciate that time. But in the 2020 NDAA, we required the department to designate a principal information operations advisor. This responsibility was given to the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. But based on your experience as a principal deputy to that position, you certainly, I think, would have a better appreciation for the scope of the responsibilities, what's necessary than most. And so with that in mind, the challenges related to dealing with warfare in the gray zone. Would you have advised assigning it to the Undersecretary of Policy, or would you have preferred to have it in a more direct and principal position by itself?
Senator, first of all, thank you for the conversation the other day. I do agree with you overall, of course, that information is a critical element of the way in which we have to think about threats and challenges of the future. We live that, frankly, every day, of course. I'm not familiar with the principal information advisor, I think I got that name slightly wrong, position. So if confirmed, I would be happy to look at that position, the legislation developing it, and the disposition, whether policy is the right place to put that.
Well, I'd appreciate that, because we obviously, I think it's important. We put it in the NDA. It's areas that you've written about as you have a chance to do a deeper dive into what will be associated with that. And I would hope that you would give us advice as to how we properly resource that position and to make sure that it gets the attention that it deserves. You have written and thought a great deal about gray zone activities and the challenges that will present. How do you view the department contributing meaningful to a whole of government approach, which you have written about extensively?
Always in a supporting role. They bring a depth of doctrinal development on how to think about things like political warfare, as we used to call it in the Cold War. And so I think in a supporting way, DoD can provide helpful insights in how we think about the information domain.
Part of dealing with the gray zones I mentioned in the question is we have to coordinate a lot of activities, cyber, and I know you've addressed a number of questions related to cyber already here today. But we have appointed a national cyber director, which will face pretty much a daunting task of trying to coordinate all of these operations and the resources of agencies, which the director doesn't really exercise any direct control over, so it makes the job even more complicated. What is your sense on the role of the National Cyber Director, and if confirmed, what is your commitment to work with that director to coordinate these activities so that we can be more effective in addressing this significant threat?
Senator, I applaud this committee in particular and others who were central to putting in the National Cyber Director position into the NDAA. Cyber is a challenge set that we have learned, over a decade plus, has just constantly challenged us in terms of working across different elements of government, from even inside the intelligence community, let alone DoD. Again, DHS, which has significant responsibilities, and other actors. So I think the advantage of having that director is pulling a lot of those threads together and creating some unity of vision. If confirmed, it is my anticipation that I would work alongside other key elements in the department with that National Cyber Director to make sure that the DoD components of the solution set on cyber are moving in the right direction and supportive of the national approach.
Thank you, Dr. Hicks.
Thank you. Senator Blackburn via WebEx.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And I want to say thank you ever so much, Ms. Hicks, for your time last week. I appreciate the conversation that we had and your thoughtful consideration of the topic we started with in that conversation, which is civilian-military relations. And you know that this is important to me, that there is concern over the erosion of civilian voices in the Pentagon. This goes back, as we discussed, into the Obama-era budget cuts, which we saw that lead to a diminishment of morale and really a breakdown of structure in the Pentagon. So moving forward, we must have a very healthy cadre of career civilians in key oversight areas for an efficient and effective Pentagon that really fights our wars and serves the needs of our service members. And I appreciate your perspective and your comments on that. We also talked about China and cyber and space and the vital importance of public-private partnerships. And as I told you, I discussed this with General Austin. So for the record, I'd like for you to touch on how you will view these public-private partnerships with companies, with universities, our national labs, which we also discussed, to make certain that we are standing strong against great power competition and that we are ready for the challenges that will come to us.
Senator, thanks so much for raising both of these issues. Let me start with the first. I, of course, think we should be as efficient as possible in the delivery of capability in the Defense Department, but it is my view that we have, in the efforts to gain efficiency, we have cut to the bone on civilian oversight in some key areas. If you look just at the prior conversation with Dr. Peters on civilian oversight of policy, that's an area very near and dear to my heart where I know we have really cut out a lot of capacity and capability. And it's hard for the civilians to provide the necessary oversight if they aren't resourced appropriately for doing so. So I do believe, if confirmed, making sure that we can act on and execute on the responsibility for civilian oversight to create healthy civil-military relations is vital. On your second point about some of the challenges we face with regard to China and in many different domains and the need for public-private partnerships, it is my strong view that the United States, if it leverages public-private partnerships effectively, can outcompete the Chinese civil-military fusion model. That model is statist. It is not taking full advantage of a vibrant private sector. And the United States has that advantage if it can tap into it. Tapping into it means, exactly as you say, working with our world-class academic community, our world-class national labs, and the sectors of the economy, the private sector elements that are working on some of the hardest problems that we face. If we can leverage those successfully, reducing barriers as we have discussed throughout the morning, I think that will put the United States in a much better competitive position than a China or a Russia.
All right. I am going to end with that. You've been generous with your time this morning. I have a couple of other questions. One on nuclear deterrent, one on cost savings at DOD. I will send those to you as QFRs. And we also touched on workforce development in our phone conversation. And I want to get a couple of answers from you on that. But in the interest of time, I will yield back my 25 seconds.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Senator Manchin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Hicks, for being here. And I know it's been a long morning for you, but appreciate it very much, and also wanting to serve at the level you'll be serving at. And I look forward to supporting you. I would like to ask you something that we've been working on, which is the Chief Management Officer. And it's been kind of shuffled around and not paid attention to, and it's just such a vital position, I believe, to try to get our financial house in order. So I wasn't sure how your feelings would be about that. And you know, it's when you look back, the cultural resistance from the Defense Business Board and the GAO and all of them have been unbelievable. And there's some critical information I think it could really help us. So I didn't know what your commitment would be to that for the National Defense Strategy, and if you believe we have the bandwidth to be necessary champion for the business reform.
Senator, I think business reform is a vital element of the job jar for the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and if confirmed, I would put serious time and energy into that portfolio. The recent end of the CMO role was followed by the current Deputy Secretary of Defense putting forth a memo that explained the disposition of those responsibilities. And if I'm confirmed, I would want to get my team in place and look at that memo and the plan that's put in place to make sure it's effective.
Sure. To follow up on that, you know, the whole culture of spend it or lose it.
The
spend it or lose it culture.
Yeah, I think
that's within government across the board, but especially in
Yep.
defense, which is the biggest purchasing agent.
Yeah, I think we have to
how do we
change.
change that?
Yeah, I think we have to change the incentives around how you promote business reform, and exactly if the incentive structure is you only get your money if you spend it inefficiently and can hold on to it and hide the ball, we're never going to get the business reform we need. So we need to change the incentive structure.
We found out in the state, when I was governor at state level, basically if we rewarded the agencies that didn't spend it all rather than wasting it, gave them a little bit of bump the next year because of the savings they had, it made them be more prudent because they weren't penalized. Might be some things we could talk to you about. I think it'd be really great. It doesn't take a whole lot. The other thing is on holding the prime contractor that does business with us, the big boys, the Boeings and all them, hold them accountable for basically the security of their networks down into their subcontractors. That's where we're getting picked off. That's where basically the hacking, that's where all the information is being stolen from. That has to be secured, and it has not. I think we've identified it. They just haven't secured it. We're not holding there's no penalty for the big prime contractor to basically secure their subs. So they just rely on the subs, whatever, and you want to know how they get in the back door, that's where they come from. And the only thing we're asking for is hold those prime accountable financially, and also basically being able to continue to be in good standing to do business. I didn't know if that's brought to your attention or not.
Senator, I would look forward to working with you and your team on exactly these kind of ideas. We have to change the accountability. We have to improve the accountability, change the incentives.
The hard thing is you have people that basically keep asking the question, how can we spend more money than all the other challengers that we have around the world? And we don't get the efficiency from it. And I think it's basically, we're not afraid to spend the money. We just want to get results from it. And I think there's a lot of waste and redundancy that we could really work on. Now, my final question would be basically, how do you rate the threats we have as a country are international threats. And if you'd rate whether it be China, Russia, Iran, this and that, what do you see to where we have to basically be on our game and step up our game, if not? Greatest threats.
Yes, Senator. The United States has regretfully not been able to have just one threat that focuses its attention, and this period is no different. From a Defense Department perspective, China is the clear pacing challenge in almost all capability areas. There are a few areas where the Russians still are pacing the United States, particularly in the strategic realm. And I think that's the key element of how we need to think about changing and shifting the force.
How about with cyber? Who's the big hitters in cyber? The same? You rate them?
Yes, Senator, I would rank them the same. I will say I look forward, if confirmed, to getting more briefings than I have had recently on exactly what improvements the Chinese and Russians are putting in place. But my view is that the Chinese are probably still the pacing challenge there.
The only thing I would be cautioned on is that basically a lot of the smaller, whether it be the Irans or whether it be different small players, they become big players in the realm of cyber, what they can do to us or what they try to do. It's very important. But look forward to working with you, especially the business reforms that need to be made.
Well, thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Dr. Hicks. Look forward to supporting you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Manchin. Senator Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. Dr. Hicks, we had a nice conversation the other day. Thank you for your background and your beliefs. What do you, when you were just talking with Senator Manchin about pacing challenge, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, it's the term means the challenge that focuses us on where the bar is, where the measure is. And so in most capability areas, China is the one who's setting the measuring stick for how advanced the capability is and how large a challenge it is for us to overcome.
Okay. Do you believe we can overcome the challenge of China, or do you think it's too late?
Senator, I don't think it's too. I don't think I would sit here if I thought it was too late. I think the United States has some inherent comparative advantages if we can tap into them effectively.
What would you consider to be our advantages and their advantages?
Sure. Some of the advantages, I think the U.S. Well, I'll focus on the U.S. if that's all right for operational security purposes. But I think the U.S. major advantage is first and foremost its alliance structure and global network, its ability to galvanize and lead on the world stage. I think we need to make sure that we have that ability to create momentum. I think in the operational sense, the United States has some advantages. Fifth generation aircraft is one. Obviously, our undersea capabilities are another. And I think in the economic or the fundamental competition space, I think the United States has a better model for its economy, and it can be more competitive than Chinese can in using their CivMil fusion statist approach versus a U.S. Dynamic approach that brings in the private sector.
If American citizens decided to stop buying Chinese products, how big of an impact would that have on China's ability to continue to be a threat?
Senator, that's something I would have to look into. I regret I've never looked at that assessment of what the implications would be, but I'd be happy to continue a conversation on that.
Okay. So the approach we've taken with Taiwan, it looks to me, it seems we've been pretty ambiguous about what we would do to defend Taiwan. What do you think about that position? And it sure appears when you look at what China's been doing now with infiltrating their airspace that our position has not done anything to deter China. Do you agree with that? And is there something we ought to be doing that would let Xi know that we're serious about defending Taiwan?
Well, first, I think we have to be crystal clear about our commitments to Taiwan. I think President Biden has done that, and certainly Congress has had 40 years of strong bipartisan support. So I think being consistent in making clear that we will meet the requirements of the Taiwan Relations Act, that we will meet the 6 assurances to Taiwan, and that we will operate in accordance with the 3 communiques between the United States and China. I think those are important to keep foremost. But those are the words. I think in the action category, 2 broad areas. One is the U.S.'s own deterrent capability, the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, that this committee and the House counterpart put forward in this latest NDAA provides some opportunity for us to build out that deterrent capability of the U.S. And then specifically with regard to Taiwan, I think the United States needs to be working closely with Taiwan to ensure it has that the U.S. can support its approach for its self-defense.
So we're running pretty big budget deficits up here, and we have now over $27 trillion worth of debt. So there's going to be a lot of pressure to see where we can save money. You know, do you believe that that we ought to be reducing our defense budget when we have the issues with China and Iran and Russia and then North Korea?
Senator, I believe the United States can meet the challenges it faces in defense. I think it can provide a strategy-driven approach to its defense budget, and that it can still deliver good value to the taxpayer in doing so.
So that means you would be okay with budget cuts in defense?
That means I think that we should be driven by strategy, and that we have the ability to afford the defense that we believe we need among all the other requirements we might have, whether that's a slightly higher top line or a slightly lower top line. Personally, I think is less relevant than are we delivering the capabilities we need for the defense we should have.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Duckworth via WebEx.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. My webcam does not seem to be working, so I'm just going to be on audio. Dr. Hicks, it's good to see you again. I can see you, you can't see me. Sorry about that. After speaking with you last week, I am confident that your leadership would help the Department of Defense address some of the most urgent national security issues facing our country. I think you would bring substantial expertise to a critically important role, and you would bear much of the responsibility for day-to-day decisions that could shape the future trajectory of DoD for many years. If confirmed as the Deputy Secretary of Defense, I would want you to use your authority and leadership to address a number of systemic issues within the department, including rebalancing the relationship between DoD and the State Department, rebuilding the team of professional civilian leaders in the DoD, and returning focus to underfunded but critically important parts of DoD's budget, like our logistics enterprise, and renewing efforts to increase diversity and inclusion among the senior ranks of our military service and broader national security community. Today, though, I want to focus my questions on the most urgent issues facing the Department of Defense, competing with the People's Republic of China, the PRC. Dr. Hicks, I know that we agree that we must use a whole of society approach, and you've discussed this at length this morning, to present ourselves as a viable alternative to China for economic, military, and diplomatic partnerships, especially in the Asia-Pacific region. We've also discussed the need to increase our military engagement in the region below the threshold of armed conflict. If confirmed, what immediate steps would you take to help DoD build relationships with allies and partners in Southeast Asia and counter China's rise in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, Senator, thank you very much. I would say it's good to see you, but it's certainly good to hear you. I think you've laid out the challenge set very, very well. As the Deputy Secretary, I imagine I will be focused internal to the department, and the Secretary will be, in particular, focused on some of these broader questions of the allied approaches. But I will say, based on my experience, there is opportunity, significant opportunity. There's openness and interest from partners throughout Asia. You and I have spoken about Indonesia and Vietnam, for instance. I think there's opportunity to demonstrate that the United States is willing to exercise freedom of navigation, freedom of air as well, and to help them build out their capacity, whether it's in something like health security because of COVID challenges, all the way up to maritime domain awareness in the South China Sea. I think there's plenty of opportunity. I'll highlight the Pacific Deterrence Initiative that this committee and its House counterpart have put forward as a venue, an opportunity, a mechanism for the Department of Defense to put some good ideas forward to Congress to make sure we're fulfilling the direction that you have given the department in these areas. And if confirmed, I would look to be using my role helping to pull that budget connectivity to the strategy forward to make sure that we're filling that basket with some good initiatives.
Thank you. We also discussed some
Senator
creative
Duckworth, let me interrupt just a moment. Senator Reed is presiding. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Hicks, we discussed some creative approaches to improving our military partnerships in Southeast Asia, such as sending the Army Corps of Engineers to assist with flooding in Jakarta, Indonesia, or expanding our international military education programs so that foreign junior officers and senior enlisted could study at U.S. civilian institutions with ROTC programs, such as Northern Illinois University or the University of Georgia, or any numerous places where there are wonderful ROTC programs. If confirmed, would you commit to exploring creative ideas such as these that could be implemented quickly and relatively cheaply to build stronger military ties, military-to-military ties with Southeast Asian nations in the near term?
Yes, Senator, I would commit to doing so.
Thank you. I bet you can guess what my next topic is, logistics. What is your assessment of the most urgent shortfalls that we must address at U.S. Transportation Command and the rest of our logistics enterprise?
Senator, logistics really is the lifeblood, and I think contested logistics is a key operational challenge set for the U.S. military today and going forward. Cybersecurity is probably at the forefront of that challenge set, and that's obviously both for the military assets, but also the significant civilian assets upon which we rely for our logistics. I think behind that would be the survivability of our logistics chain and our fuel consumption, and ensuring that we can have a light footprint with regard to logistics, maybe even leveraging capabilities that allow us to create capability in place.
Thank you. And I have additional questions I would like to submit to you for the record that have to do with additional follow-up on logistics, and then also on diversity and inclusion within the DoD. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to go ahead and submit those for the questions for the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of Chairman Inhofe, Senator Hawley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Hicks, thank you for being here. Congratulations on your nomination. Let me ask you about the National Defense Strategy Commission, of which you were a member. That commission wrote that, and I'm quoting now, successfully competing in Europe and the Indo-Pacific region while also managing escalation dynamics requires positioning substantial capability forward to deter and prevent a fait accompli by an agile, opportunistic adversary. Now, when I asked Secretary Austin about this, he responded that he agreed with that assessment. Let me just ask you if you stand by the Commission's assessment that the U.S. military must position substantial capability forward, I'm still quoting, to deter and prevent a fait accompli.
I do.
Very good. Secretary Austin also wrote in response to me that a combat credible forward deterrent posture is instrumental to the U.S. military's ability to deter and, if necessary, deny a fait accompli scenario. Do you agree with the Secretary's emphasis on the need for deterrence by denial, especially when it comes to a fait accompli scenario?
I do.
Let me ask you about, I'm glad to hear that also, thank you. Let me ask you about something that the President, State Department has recently said with regard to Taiwan. You were talking with Senator Scott a moment ago about Taiwan. President Biden's State Department has recently described America's commitment to Taiwan as rock solid, that's their words, which is exactly as it should be. With that in mind, do you think that China is more or less likely to attempt a fait accompli against Taiwan if it knows that we would be able to defeat such an attempt?
Less likely.
In that case, wouldn't you agree that we'd want to maintain our ability to defeat a Chinese fait accompli against Taiwan, and that would help strengthen our deterrence? Is that a fair assessment?
It is, Senator. I would only add that Taiwan primarily also needs to be engaged in that defense.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly right. Let me ask you about your experience previously in the Pentagon. President Obama tried to pivot to Asia famously when you were last at the Pentagon, but he and DOD in particular ended up getting drawn back continually into the Middle East due to events there. Can you just give us your sense, what does the department need to do differently this time around to make sure that we avoid the same outcome?
Senator, the rebalance to Asia, pivot to Asia approach did precede both ISIS and the Russian annexation of Crimea. And those put serious stressors, particularly in a period of the Budget Control Act. So I think it's about, frankly, as Secretary Austin has said, matching resources to strategy, to policy, to the will of the American people. And we need to make sure that we have our defense assets and resources focused on the areas where the American public expects the Defense Department to be.
Very good. Let me just ask you further on this subject. President Obama's former acting special representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan recently wrote, quoting now, "For the long term, the United States will need a counterterrorism capability that does not depend on a permanent U.S. military presence in Afghanistan." And she went on to say that the Biden administration should work swiftly to develop such options, including by ensuring U.S. capacity to mount operations in Afghanistan from outside the country. Do you think that DoD should be working with its interagency partners to evaluate and develop options along those lines?
So, Senator, my view is that we have had 20 years of honorable service by our military members in Afghanistan, working alongside allies and partners. President Biden has ordered a holistic review of where we are on Afghanistan policy, and frankly, holistic review is the right approach. This isn't just about end strength numbers on the ground. This is about achieving the holistic approach related to counterterrorism and a few other areas that is important and what it takes to do that. So I'm very supportive of that approach, and if confirmed as Deputy Secretary of Defense, I would work in support of trying to determine what the right answer to your question is.
Very good. And would you also support having the department brief Congress on its findings as these reviews that you've talked about get underway and then conclude and reach some deliverables so that we here can have an informed debate about the best path forward in Afghanistan?
Absolutely, Senator.
Thank you. Finally, I'm almost out of time, but let me just ask you about our allies. We're spending about 4% of our GDP to defend ourselves. That's a big number, as you've referenced several times today. Shouldn't we insist that our European allies, especially wealthier ones like Germany, spend at least the 2% that they agreed to back in 2014?
Senator, I regret this is a slightly long answer from me, so let me try to do it more briefly than I probably would otherwise. I think we need to make sure that we're taking a strategic approach to what commitment means. I think we need to make sure that allies are as into the security relationship as we are. Sometimes it's through spending, sometimes it's through defense spending, and sometimes that commitment is expressed in other ways. And I think we should be strategic about how we consider those commitments.
Can I just, Mr. Chairman, it's my last question, I'll stop. Just on that point, about your point about strategy, Dr. Hicks, isn't it a matter of strategic importance to us, however, that our European allies do as much as they possibly can for their own defense in Europe, precisely because, as you said just a moment ago, the pacing threat for us is in Indo-PACOM. We face a challenge there from the Chinese government and a rising China, such that we really haven't seen a peer competitor, the likes of which we haven't seen in our lifetimes. I mean, so isn't it a matter of strategic importance to urge our allies to do all that they can in partnership with us, but in their own defense?
I do believe that. I think that's true of every ally.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And Dr. Hicks, thank you for your very impressive testimony. And I don't think I speak for myself, but I look forward to working with you. There are no further witnesses or colleagues. The hearing's adjourned. Thank you, Dr. Hicks.
Thank you, Senator.